On a bitter February day in Kingston upon Hull, England, Humberside Police issued a public appeal for information regarding a missing student who had vanished just 24 hours earlier. It didn't take long for the case to reveal itself as anything but ordinary. The frantic search for Libby Squire began on February 1st, 2019, after she had been denied entry to a popular nightclub the previous evening. CCTV footage showed that she was last seen sitting on a bench near a bus stop at the junction of a busy road. Then she got into an unidentified man's car and was never seen alive again. This is the story of Libby Squire, a crime that would shock the city of Hull. Libby Squire, who went by Libby, was born on New Year's Day in 1998 to parents Lisa and Russ Squire and grew up in West Wickham, Buckinghamshire. She grew up as the oldest of 4 children, with 2 younger sisters and a younger brother. She was a happy child who was very close to her family and siblings. At school, Libby loved studying English literature, and Latin. She was bright and curious, and her friendly personality helped her form a close group of friends. Many of these friendships went all the way back to primary school, and she stayed in touch with them on social media after moving away. But Libby had the habit of pushing herself too hard and sometimes held herself to impossible standards. At the age of 16, she suffered a nervous breakdown, lost weight, and became depressed and anxious. Despite this, Libby got glowing A-level results, which is equivalent to high school results, in Britain, and decided to pursue her dream of studying philosophy. When it came time to choose a university, Libby decided on University of Hull in Kingston upon Hull, about 200 miles away from West Wickham, a port city on the east coast of England that's pronounced Hull by locals. The city has a rich and dramatic history. It was an important battleground during the English Civil Wars, and in the 18th century, one of its members of parliament, William Wilberforce, played a key role in ending the slave trade in Britain. During World War II, Hull was heavily bombed, with more than 95% of the city damaged or destroyed. After the war, the city faced challenges like poverty and struggles with education and policing. Over time, the destroyed areas were rebuilt, marking a new chapter for Hull. Today it is teeming with a lively nightlife and art scene and has a population of about 270,000. According to her parents, Libby hadn't even visited the city before accepting her place, but felt sure it was where she wanted to be. Her mother was nervous for her to leave home due to Libby's fragile mental health, but was supportive of her daughter's ambitions. In September 2017, Libby moved to Hull to study philosophy. She settled in quickly, made new friends at university, and was happy with her life in the city. She was part of several university clubs and other activities. Hull became her second home, and she was excited by her future plans to travel the world and then one day become a journalist. Although Libby was doing well academically and socially, her mental health was still in a fragile state. Unbeknownst to her friends and family, Libby had researched methods to take her own life, including an internet search made about how to drown herself in a river. On the evening of January 31st, 2019, 21-year-old Libby Squire went out with friends for a night of fun. The group of 5 friends decided to have some drinks before going to a popular nightclub called the Welly. Libby texted her boyfriend, Connor, to wish him a good night. She told him she was going to leave her phone at home because she had smashed many phone screens on nights out and didn't want to risk another costly mistake. By 11:20 p.m., the group arrived at the Welly, but the door staff refused Libby entry as she appeared to be too intoxicated, which was true after several bottles of wine. In a calm interaction, Libby told her friends to carry on without her and she would go back home. Concerned for her safety, her friends called a taxi to take her home to Wellesley Avenue. They then went into the nightclub for a good time, but none of them knew that, in a cruel twist of fate, it would be the last time they'd see Libby alive. Her friends finished their night at around 3 a.m. and decided to check if Libby was home safe and head back themselves and call it a night. When they received no response from Libby, they messaged her housemate and then anyone they could think of who might know where she was. Eventually, they realized that Libby had never arrived home that night. 3 a.m. turned into dawn, and eventually, a missing persons report was filed with the Humberside police. Over the next few weeks, searches were conducted by friends, family, University of Hull students, members of the public, and Humberside police. A public appeal with Libby's face and details was displayed in busier areas of Hull, asking if any witnesses could provide more information. Everyone hoped that Libby would be back in a few days. Due to her previous struggles with her mental health, it was thought that Libby could have just run away. Whilst Hull does have a rate of violent crime comparable to other British cities, there wasn't really anything to suggest that she had been harmed. The taxi driver from that night came forward and told the police he dropped Libby off at Wellesley Avenue and tried to help her as she seemed intoxicated, but drove off when she refused his help. This was validated by CCTV footage, but it also showed that Libby stopped just short of entering her home. From her body language, she seemed nervous and erratic, walking without a purpose, likely due to intoxication or a bad mental state. Over the course of a few weeks, as the search for Libby continued, several witnesses came forward to tell the police about their strange encounters with Libby. Based on their accounts and CCTV footage, the police were able to piece together a sequence of events to aid in finding her. The taxi dropped Libby off at Wellesley Avenue, close to her house, at around 11:30 p.m. 3 male witnesses saw her fall flat on her face outside the house, and they, along with the taxi driver, tried to help her, but she refused. She eventually reached her front door, but didn't go inside. The reason Libby didn't go inside her house that night was never confirmed. It's thought that she might have lost her keys, but the complete belongings she had with her were never recovered. CCTV showed her turning around and starting to walk back towards the main road, Beverly Road. When she started sobbing on the street, her neighbors and fellow students, Hannah Wright and Emma Halshaw, took notice and invited her to their flat, but she only stayed for a bit, then left. Just 10 minutes later, she was seen about half a mile away on Beverly Road. 2 men, Roland Jacobs and Alan Jones, who were on their way home from a darts match, were concerned for her safety and stopped their car to ask if she was okay. She was lying in the road and mumbling incoherently, and asked Roland Jacobs to lay down with her, which he refused, and upon his refusal, she started to swear at him, so the men eventually gave up and decided to leave. Libby was spotted again around midnight, lying on the floor near a bus stop. She was crying and screaming when a passerby named Lorna Allen, who was leaving a nearby pub, stopped to ask her if she needed help. Libby got up, mumbled something about going back home, and staggered away in the wrong direction. It's not as straightforward as it may seem to build a trail using CCTV and other camera footage. You have to know the exact street or building where you think the missing person might have been. CCTV footage from public property is the easiest to obtain, or you have to rely on the cooperation of residents and businesses who may or may not have doorbell or security cameras on their premises. Then you have to comb through hours of footage from each source. Sometimes, it isn't possible to complete the trail, like in locations where there are no cameras or when footage is too grainy or the view is obstructed. In these cases, all you can do is make an educated guess. Another witness, Sam Alford, had come forward to the police, stating he'd been awoken by a shrilled scream he had heard around midnight the night Libby went missing. The scream had come from a field close to his house called Oak Road Playing Fields. When Sam looked out his window, he had seen a man hurrying to his car, a silver Vauxhall Astra, which then jet off into the night. Further investigation by the police into the CCTV footage uncovered a silver Vauxhall Astra passing by Libby on Beverly Road around midnight. The car then parked at the end of Haworth Street, and the man sat in the driver's seat watching Libby from a distance. The man, who was dressed like he was in his late 20s or early 30s, observed Libby before crossing the road and approaching her. At around 12:08 a.m., The unidentified man and Libby got into the silver Astra, which set off and arrived at Oak Road playing fields approximately 10 minutes before Sam Alford had heard the loud scream. 20 minutes later, the footage showed the car leaving Oak Road playing fields. This new evidence confirmed everyone's worst fears, that Libby had been abducted. Following this lead, the police made an appeal to the public, requesting more information about the silver Vauxhall Astra. They had the make and model of the car, but the footage was not clear enough to determine the number plate or identify the driver. Silver Astras are fairly common in the UK, so it appeared the police had a lot of work ahead of them, but unbeknownst to them, the same vehicle had been reported for another incident just a few hours after Libby was reported missing. At around 3 in the morning on February the 1st, police received 2 separate reports that someone had been publicly masturbating on a street a few minutes away from Oak Road playing fields. On both occasions, the man was seen on CCTV leaving in a silver Vauxhall Astra. This time, the appearance of the driver and the car's number plate was much clearer. The vehicle registration details led them to an address on Raglan Street, where the owner was a married father of 2 named Pawel Relowicz. At the time the incidents were reported, police had no reason to believe he had any relation to Libby's disappearance, but his car made him a person of interest. He was arrested initially for sexual offenses unrelated to Libby on February the 6th, 2019. Relowicz was born on June the 25th, 1994, in a small village called Warszawice in northern Poland, and moved to the United Kingdom in 2015, where he worked as a butcher in a small meat processing plant in North Yorkshire. On the surface, he appeared to be just another person trying to build a life in a new country. In 2016, Relowicz met his wife Jagoda through a dating app. The couple hadn't met many times in person before they decided to marry, and Jagoda moved to Hull to live with him. They quickly started a family, having 2 children. To neighbors and co-workers, he seemed like a typical husband and father, but beneath his family man exterior lurked a deeply disturbing pattern of behavior. Starting in 2017, Relowicz began a shocking escalation of sexual crimes that went undetected for years. His violations became increasingly brazen. His wife noticed his suspicious behavior. Relowicz would go missing for hours late into the night and tell her he was out jogging, but she thought he was having an affair. The truth was that he was up to something much more sinister, which would eventually link him to Libby's disappearance. In July 2017, Relowicz spied on a student couple through their bedroom window while they were having what news reports describe as an intimate moment. In December of that year, he broke into a home to steal personal items like sex toys and underwear. In January 2019, 3 weeks before Libby's disappearance, he was reported to have publicly masturbated in front of women on 2 separate occasions. One woman reported that he had followed her home and ejaculated on her front door, while another reported him touching himself as he leered into her window as she was changing. What made these crimes even more chilling was how he had managed to avoid detection. On one occasion, he even left one of his used condoms as a trophy for a woman he had been spying on. But because he had no prior criminal record, police had no DNA or fingerprint database entry to match the evidence. It wasn't until his arrest in February 2019 that Relowicz was finally linked to these serial offenses. At the time of his arrest, Relowicz's house and car were searched, and police found a pink gym bag containing sex toys, female underwear, and photographs of women, all of which he had stolen in burglaries. Along with a list of all the student accommodation in Hull, his semen and saliva were found on some of the items. During his police interview, Relowicz provided his version of the story on his interaction with Libby. He claimed he was out jogging when he encountered Libby on Beverly Road, and she seemed extremely distressed. According to his statement, she was crying and appeared unwell. She was wearing a miniskirt and had cut her knee, and he claimed he felt bad for her. He said he stopped to help her, asking what was wrong. He described her as disoriented, potentially drugged, and said he asked for her address. When she said she wanted to go to her mother's house, he offered to take her there. So they got into his car and stopped at Oak Road playing fields, where he said they had consensual sex outside the car and next to a metal shed. He said she then asked for a hug, which he refused, and she tried to hit him in response, so he got into his car and drove away. After he got home, Relowicz sat with his wife, used the computer, and took a bath. When asked why his car appeared on CCTV again near Oak Road playing fields at 2:25 a.m., he said he went back out because he was concerned about the girl's welfare. When questioned about his other sexual offenses, Relowicz admitted that he had a problem with his urges, but he was working on them. However, he insisted that he had nothing to do with Libby's disappearance. By this point, the police had enough evidence to convict him for sexual offenses unrelated to Libby's disappearance, but not for the murder of Libby Squire. But they didn't have to wait too long until Libby's body turned up. At 6:45 a.m. on March the 20th, 2019, fisherman Paul Secker set out for the day from Grimsby Marina and sailed out to the River Humber. When at about 12 p.m. near Spurn Point, he noticed an object floating towards his boat. After a little while, he could make out a face and black clothing and saw it was a human body. The body floated past his boat, and he immediately reported it to the vessel traffic system, who asked him to keep an eye on it. Eventually, the police were able to retrieve the body, along with a black sports bra, a skirt, and black and white shoes, and confirmed that it was Libby Squire. The exact cause of death could not be determined due to decomposition and water damage. There were several injuries and bruises, some of which could have been from an altercation or occurred in the water. But notably, there were signs of strangulation, sexual assault, and most importantly, sperm cells that matched Relowicz's DNA profile. From the police body cam footage, Relowicz didn't seem shocked or surprised when police arrested him a second time, this time for Libby's murder and rape. But he insisted it was a big misunderstanding. In August 2019, he was charged with 4 counts of voyeurism, 2 counts of outraging public decency, and 3 counts of burglary, for which he pled guilty, and he was sentenced to 8.5 years in prison, which was reduced to 5 years after an appeal. He was subsequently charged with Libby Squire's and murder in October 2019, but the trial was delayed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. When it eventually went ahead in February 2021, Relowicz's trial lasted for a month. The prosecution argued that he had been prowling the streets of Hull looking for a victim when he came across Libby and saw that she would be an easy target due to her being intoxicated and in a poor mental state. They claimed that Relowicz convinced her to get into his car under the impression that he was going to help, or he forced her. He then drove her to Oak Road playing fields, where he forced himself upon her before murdering her and disposing of her body in the River Hull. It was highlighted that Relowicz's sexual deviancy was increasing in its severity, and he was brazenly exposing himself and pleasuring himself non-consensually in front of women, signaling that he was unable to control his urges. Relowicz pled not guilty and argued that he was being a good Samaritan and showing concern for a distressed young woman who was under the influence. He repeated to jurors what he told the police, that he drove Libby to Oak Road playing fields, where they had consensual sex, and then she left his car and he drove home. Relowicz's defense team claimed that Libby had taken her own life by jumping into the river after leaving Relowicz's car. They told the jury that she had poor mental health and presented the fact that she has searched for how to drown herself in a river online as a good indicator of her intention. After 6 days of deliberation, Relowicz was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Libby Squire, with a minimum of 27 years, plus 18 years to be served concurrently for her. Libby's funeral was held in St. Lawrence's Church in West Wickham, where her parents live, on October 2019, with about 250 people to see her off. The bench where she rested on briefly in Hull was memorialized in her honor. Thank you for listening.